Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberkaş. It was the first NATO leaders summit to be held since the global pandemic struck in 2020. Past differences within the alliance lingered on during a very unpredictable and volatile year, especially when it came to Turkey's relations with key members of the bloc, notably the United States. All eyes were on the meeting between Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his U.S. counterpart, their first face-to-face sit-down since Joe Biden took office. Despite a series of long-running disputes between the NATO allies, President Erdogan said the meeting was positive for the future. Although no clear breakthroughs were made, especially over Turkey's purchase of Russia's S-400 missile system, the friendly atmosphere did send a message that their alliance was key to both countries and NATO as a whole. One area that showed that resolve is Afghanistan. Turkey is expected to take over security at Kabul airport once U.S. troops withdraw from the country later this year. Both countries also acknowledged that stabilizing Afghanistan could be a new area of cooperation. And to break down where everything is headed, joining me from Antalya is Tarik Oguzlu. He is a professor of international relations at Antalya Bilim University. Also from Antalya, Matthew Bryza. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. And from Istanbul, Michael Cox, who is the lecturer at Bahçeşehir University and a senior advisor at the Global Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. So, Sean, what's your take on Biden-Erdogan meeting at the NATO summit? Has it been really fruitful and a constructive one for both sides?
I don't know necessarily that I would call it fruitful, but it was definitely constructive in the sense that they got to see each other face to face and they got to had the opportunity to lay out their expectations from one another. What we're looking at here is two countries that for at least the last decade have a fundamentally different version of what their international security needs and their geopolitical interests are. And these haven't changed much. And now we have this opportunity with President Biden and President Erdogan meeting for them to sit down and sort of wrestle over what are the differences and can we find some kind of common ground. So I think this demonstrates that there was a good potential for each side to identify what their needs and their interests are very clearly in a very measured way and to have it as a starting point to move forward in rebuilding a relationship that has been strained over the last years.
Speaking of geopolitical needs, Tarik, have Turkey's concerns over an array of issues, including the U.S. support for the PKK-YPG terror organization in Syria, been addressed? What's the latest?
I think the two countries have not resolved their fundamental issues yet in a comprehensive manner. There are so many issues that pit United States and Turkey at different sites. But rather than this existence of conflictual problems which remain to be non-resolved, they have got the opportunity to talk to each other and to explore the possibilities of having further cooperation in some minor issues concerning Afghanistan, for example. But let me also add something else. I think this Turkish-American summit meeting should be seen in the context of changing American grand strategy with the Biden administration in power. So as part of President Biden's efforts to help revive the transatlantic community, I think they have decided to include Turkey in this family once again. So they are trying to explore the opportunities, how Turkey might be re-included in the so-called transatlantic international community. So I think this part of the summit meeting should be emphasized more than the other issues, the kind of bilateral problems that the two countries find really difficult to resolve. As you have just pointed out, Syria remains there. S-400 problem is still non-resolved. And Turkey's frustration with American support to PKK affiliates in northern Syria lingers on the issue. So these fundamental problems remain non-resolved. It's very clear.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew, where do you think the S-400 dispute stands now? I mean, has it been put on hold? Is it likely that we see some, progress on that soon?
No, it's not likely that we'll see any progress on S-400 soon because the U.S. law that was passed at the end of last year says that sanctions must remain no matter what the President of the United States wishes to do until the S-400s are no longer on Turkish soil. And that's impossible for Turkey now to remove the S-400s, of course, politically, and they won't do it. So I think what has to happen now is this great chemistry that was established between Presidents Erdogan and Biden, which I know, having confirmed it with my friends on both sides, they really felt. That now has to deepen, and there needs to be practical cooperation on issues like Afghanistan. It's a big deal that Turkey is going to stay to protect Hamid Karzai Airport, that apparently President Biden pledged that Turkey would receive the logistical, financial, and political support it needs. And most importantly, having participated in summit meetings with President Erdogan and then President George W. Bush, the key is that the presidents don't just say nice things and feel good things about each other, but they assign working groups to work out the modalities of a project. And that is exactly what happened in the case of Afghanistan. So the two presidents have taken practical steps to get the relations back on track. But the S-400 issue can only be resolved, I think, if President Biden goes back to the Congress and convinces Congress to change this law I was talking about. And that's going to require even more than good chemistry between the two presidents, though that's a start. It's going to require some real progress and achievements, in this case, in the case of Afghanistan. And I am not pessimistic about that.
Okay, so Sean, stark differences are likely to stay there for a while. Matthew just briefly mentioned Afghanistan. We're going to get into that soon. But other than Afghanistan, how do you think the two countries could move on?
Well, as has been pointed out, is that in small steps is what we need to see from each country. Afghanistan is a good place to start because it's a relatively minor issue. And if there can be some sort of confidence building between the two sides, that they're able to work with one another and they're able to recognize the interests of each other, then that builds confidence over time. As I said, this conflict that we've been having and we've been seeing between the United States and Turkey has been going on for some time. And the key issues seem unresolvable for the foreseeable future. But if we can work around those issues, for example, Russia has become an increasing presence in the Black Sea, and the United States sees that as a potential threat. Well, Turkey is in the process of balancing its relationship between the United States and Russia and can sort of act as an intermediary, or it can help monitor Russian activities in the Black Sea on behalf of Nato and the United States, which was also build confidence in Turkey's commitment to the ideals of NATO.
I really wonder how it's going to play out for Turkey. So, Tarik, can Turkey's post-NATO role in Afghanistan help mend ties between Turkey and the U.S.? And is it worth the risk?
I think I don't want to underestimate the importance of Turkish-American cooperation in Afghanistan, but I am of the view that this is not one of the key issues of discussion between the two countries. The other issues seem to be much more fundamental to the fabric of the relationship. As you all know, that Turkey has been in Afghanistan over the last 20 years and has taken responsibilities in the management of the conflict there. So there is no question on this issue. But even here in Turkey, there is a kind of discussion to what extent and what kind of roles Turkey would fulfill in Afghanistan. And is it going to be in Turkey's interest to serve there, to act as the representative of NATO? They're taking all kinds of military responsibilities without securing any kind of financial or logistical support from the other members of NATO. And besides that, it is going to be extremely difficult for Turkey to put a kind of break in its relationship with Russia, just for the sake of having a much better relationship with the United States within the NATO, within the transatlantic community. So Afghanistan, from my own perspective, seems to be a minor issue compared to much more important issues that somehow poison the bilateral relationship. So we should put a stress on those issues rather than talking about Turkey's potential contribution to what's going on in Afghanistan.
So if we leave Afghanistan aside, you say it remains a minor issue. Matthew, are we likely to see, for example, more cooperation between the two countries in Syria moving forward?
Well, that depends on how well the cooperation goes in Afghanistan. There has to be built up a pattern of concrete cooperation that achieves something that's tangible. By the way, Afghanistan is a huge issue for President Biden. Maybe not for Turkey, but for him, it's really a big issue, given all the lives and all the billions of dollars, $1 trillion that the United States has spent there. In Syria, I don't anticipate any short-term resolution of the dispute over YPG. And for the record, I know the YPG is a terrorist organization. I know it from the time when I was leading U.S. relations with Turkey way back 10 years ago. And I think President Biden knows that as well. So if this cooperation begins to yield fruits in Afghanistan, and by the way, in the Black Sea, supporting Ukraine, about which both Presidents Erdogan and Biden are really concerned in terms of Russia's military buildup and aggression against Ukraine, then I think there can be a different mood in Washington, a different mood in the White House, and then we might see President Biden coming up with ways to wind down the U.S. cooperation with the YPG and instead embraced the U.S.'s NATO ally in Turkey. And immediately, even before all that happens, certainly there can be some cooperation, a lot of cooperation between the U.S. and Turkey in Idlib and beginning to rebuild northern Syria. And in a press conference that President Biden gave at the NATO summit, he slipped. He said, well, I'm going to talk to President Putin about how maybe we can work together to rebuild northern Syria. And then he paused and he said, well, I don't want to negotiate in public. But clearly, Russia wants the U.S. to help fund and gain additional funding from the EU for rebuilding northern Syria. And none of that can be done without Turkey.
Okay, so, but we also know that Turkey has, Sean, undertaken important tasks under the ISAF, International Security and Assistance Force, since the United States invaded Afghanistan. So the two countries know one another very well. Are they rediscovering each other? And what are the pros and cons for Turkey when it supplants the U.S. influence in Afghanistan?
To a certain extent, they are rediscovering each other, particularly because for the last 4 years, there was sort of a split personality with the relationship with the United States, in that you had a president in the form of Donald Trump who didn't coordinate his actions or his activities with the legislative branch in the United States. Now that President Biden is in office, and with all the vast years of experience he has had working within the legislative branch, what we see is a more unified front on the side of the United States. And so it's not so much as rediscovering each other as it is a return to how the U.S. has conducted its foreign policy in the past, with the minor exception of the Trump administration. So this should be fairly familiar territory for Turkey and how they work with the United States. It should be like wearing an old pair of slippers in the house. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it's regular. They won't expect anything untoward or exaggerated in terms of their responses. So what it does for us is that we need to see that if and when Turkey takes over control of Hamid Karzai Airport in Kabul, that the United States is going to be willing to step up and support them, whether through some sort of military support, financial support, political support as well, because Turkey is taking on a very important role that will help fulfill U.S. domestic interest in having its troops exit Afghanistan.
Yes. So besides Tarik, diplomatic, logistic, and financial assistance, Turkey is also looking for Pakistan and Hungary's involvement in this new mission in Afghanistan. Why? And is Pakistan and Hungary's presence viable in Afghanistan? And what's in it for Hungary?
I think there are so many challenges for Turkey in Afghanistan. So it is not any easy. It is not that much easy for Turkey to decide to take all kinds of responsibilities in terms of overseeing security challenges there, including the presence of Taliban, including the presence of Pakistan. So Turkey needs to go a long way to mend fences with the actors on the ground, and also talk about the possibility of the cooperation with the countries there. But another question that comes to my mind seems to be much more important. If that is so much important for the United States to secure Turkey's cooperation in Afghanistan, and if it is that, again, so much importance for the US to see Turkey somehow balances its relations with Russia, then how would the United States accommodate Turkey's much more important strategic interest in its own neighborhoods? So we know that Eastern Mediterranean is quite important for us. What's happening in Syria is quite important for us. Turkey's military activities in Libya and Caucasian region are quite important for us. But on all these fronts, the United States appear to be somehow in opposition to Turkey's. So what will Turkey get in return for its active contribution to peace and stability in Afghanistan, and also putting a break in its somehow relationship with Russia?
So, Matthew, how has Washington's decision to pull out of Afghanistan triggered a regional power play with different Asian countries, like from China to Turkey, from Russia to India? Because we know that Russia says Turkish military presence in Afghanistan is in violation of the US-Taliban agreement. What's your take on that? Are we likely to see tensions rise between Turkey and Russia?
Well, I think they're already very high based on my conversations with people at the absolute highest level here in Turkey. There's deep concern about Russia's huge military buildup a couple of months ago along the Ukraine-Russia border. Deep concern about the fate of the Crimean Tatars and Crimea in general. Deep concern about Russia's increasingly militarized actions in the Black Sea. Getting back to Afghanistan, I don't think Russia wants any role in Afghanistan. It's one of the greatest debacles in their national security history, at least in the 20th century. Pakistan is the key. Yeah. Pakistan has always been the key to Afghanistan. And so the fact that Turkey may work with Pakistan, that is smart.
But they have already been working on it for decades now.
Of course, but as you said yourself, Aisha, now there's this Hungary-Pakistan-Turkey triangle in Afghanistan, and that's why Hungary wants to do that. I don't know why. I mean, maybe it's because they're a NATO member state, and they're sort of in the doghouse as well across the transatlantic community because of Viktor Orban's behavior domestically. Maybe they feel this is a way to get back in the good graces of NATO. But to wind up, and again, I don't think Turkey is volunteering for this very dangerous or risky role in Afghanistan to please the United States. I think both countries realize they have overlapping interests here. Remember, Turkey led ISAF in the beginning, right? Way back in 2002 to 2007. Yes. And so Turkey is comfortable operating in Afghanistan. It's been very successful. And I think President Erdogan saw this is an area where the U.S. and Turkey really have some overlapping interests. And let's give it a go. Let's work together.
So, Sean, is the U.S. trying to drive a wedge between Turkey and Russia? And how could a more revitalized NATO impact Turkey's relations with Russia as well as with China? Because we know that Turkey has deep-seated relations with those countries and very, very important economic agreements. What's your take on that?
I would absolutely agree that the United States is attempting to drive a wedge between Turkey and Russia because of the shifting global situation with multiple sources of power now, with China, with Russia, with the United States competing with one another to bring countries in to their side of the alliance. What the United States doesn't want to see is this strategic autonomy that Turkey has been pursuing for the last some years. Have it shift to a reduction in dependency on the United States, only to be compensated or substituted with an increase in dependency on Russia. The United States, ultimately, if they would like to see Turkey rejoin the Western fold, but if that's not possible, what they would like to see is more of a firm neutrality where they can establish a relationship that's based on transactions, where they're clearly defined objectives and they're clearly defined expectations of how they will interact with one another. But this will serve as a springboard to strengthen the relationships and draw Turkey away from Russia and from China.
So, Tarik, the Turkish president also met with the leaders of France and Greece at the NATO summit, where he said they would focus on areas of cooperation rather than contention when it comes to relations with Ankara's partners. How do you think Ankara's relations with these countries move on when it comes to Eastern Mediterranean and Libya?
I think I'm quite optimistic about the possibility of Turkey having a much better relationship with the key actors inside the European Union, particularly in the context of the crisis and instability in the Eastern Mediterranean region. These should be considered as part of the general consensus within the transatlantic community that Turkey should be reborn to the transatlantic community. Again, this very much relates to the changing grand strategy on the part of the United States. I totally agree with the other speakers in the sense that it is going to be in the United States' interest to see Turkey back in the club again. But we have to underline one significant dynamic of global politics. We are no longer living in the first decade of the 21st century. So since the time Turkey took up main responsibility in Afghanistan, many things have changed. Now we are somehow in the middle of a multipolar international environment, and Turkey needs to be given a kind of respect in the context of its claim to have a strategic autonomy in its foreign policy. So if Turkey has been given such kind of a status in this foreign policy, so it is going to be much easier for Turkey to put its eggs, let me put this way, in the Western basket once again. But this is going to be extremely difficult to do on the part of the United States in particular, because we are now living in a multipolar international environment. So you have to somehow accommodate Turkey's key strategic concerns in its particular neighborhood in order to make sure that Turkey contributes to larger transatlantic security interests across the globe in one way or another. So this is going to be quite difficult to do.
So, Matthew, what's the U.S.'s approach to Turkey when it comes to Eastern Mediterranean and Libya? Because if I'm not mistaken, Turkish President Erdogan and French President Macron agreed on withdrawing, for example, for mercenaries in Libya. And we see that the U.S. and Turkey stand on the same side when it comes to Libya. What's your take on that? How it's going to move forward?
Well, I think in the Trump administration, there was a total lack of clarity as to whether or not the U.S. supported the warlord al-Haftar or the UN-recognized government of national accord in Tripoli. Now it's clearer. After the political transition process was agreed by all the parties, and then there's a new U.S. president, now it's clear the U.S. supports the UN-recognized government. And I think we're going to see Turkey and the U.S. on the same side. And the withdrawal of mercenaries, especially the Russian ones, is really quite an important step. And, I think Tarik is exactly right that Turkey is insisting on and wants to and expects rightfully that it should have the room to be able to be strategically autonomous. The problem is that philosophically in Washington, there's a strong belief that NATO allies need to act in concert, need to reinforce each other, need to support each other. And Turkey is seen as having been operating outside that consensus. But that's not fair. Because when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, you've got Greece that has completely taken one side in the Cyprus dispute and has been very provocative for months in terms of its rhetoric toward Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. Mm-hmm. So Greece had, within NATO, skewed the debate. I think Turkey now is starting to pull the debate back toward a more objective position. And it's been very successful in de-escalating tension, getting Angela Merkel on Turkey's side and getting Macron more on Turkey's side, because Turkey has refrained for the last few months from exploring for oil and gas in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, I really wonder if the French president changed his mind about NATO when he called it brain dead just a year ago. So, Sean, one of the important outcomes of the NATO summit was the leaders' agreement on China, that it presents systemic challenges to the world order. What kind of consequences are we likely to see from this common approach, and how do you think the world order will take shape?
Well, it's very interesting because there are no real obvious consequences from this declaration. China is involved in Europe to a certain extent. For example, 18 countries of the EU are involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. But aside from that and tourism, honestly, there isn't a wide array of areas where the two regions interact, where they connect with one another. With the United States, of course, their bilateral relationship with China is of much greater importance than a multilateral relationship through an organization like NATO. So the obvious outcome of such a declaration is, for me at least, it's somewhat unclear. There is consensus that something needs to be done about China, but what is that thing to be done is still up for debate and still subject to quite a bit of discussion.
So, Tarik, are we likely to see a era of cold peace instead of Cold War now?
It is the most important question of our times to answer, actually. But I am of the view that the United States under Biden administration is adopting a kind of extremely hawkish and idealistic approach to international relations, putting democracies against somehow autocracies. So dividing the global politics alongside this particular fault line, I think is not constructive in the context of having global peace and stability. We should also make it very clear that not all members of NATO, not all members of the European Union are on the same page with the United States concerning how to deal with Russia, how to deal with China. From the perspective of many EU members, from many European countries inside NATO, China is most a kind of economic partner or a kind of systemic rival, but it is not a foe, it is not an enemy. particularly in the context of values and human rights. They might put a stress on human atrocities taking place inside China, but they are not in favor of putting China as a kind of global threat based on ideas and norms. So they don't want to see themselves somehow sandwiched between the United States on the one hand and China on the other hand. And Turkey is similar to many other members of NATO in this particular context. And Turkey, similar to many other mid-power countries, do not want to pick a side in this particular confrontation.
Okay, all right, gentlemen. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, follow us and tweet us at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.